Hey everyone, Tactics here, and today, well, we do have 10.2.6 coming out and Plunderstorm, that new event. We also are seeing some data mining for Season 4 of Dragonflight, so I just want to do a quick video breaking down all that stuff we're seeing, as we are seeing a bunch of dungeon tuning, a lot of dungeon tuning actually, confirming, of course, it's going to be the 8 original Dragonflight dungeons, part of the Season 4 dungeon pool, and we're also seeing some tuning to classes and trinkets, particularly tier sets for classes, but also some other changes to a couple specs. So let's go through it. To start, of course, everyone's favorite mount in the entire game, the Amoridon, whatever. It's still the KSM Mount in Season 4. It's actually got a pretty cool skin this time, but, you know, it is still just a ground mount. Probably not going to use it too often, but at least the skin's kind of cool compared to the other ones. But yeah, that's the KSM Mount confirmed. Hopefully, maybe we see some more rewards higher up in Mythic Plus, you know, transmog recolors, that kind of thing, but nothing as of yet. Class tuning, like I mentioned, a lot of this is reverts to some of the nerfs these tier pieces got going into the next patch. Like a lot of the Aberrus tier, for example, got nerfed going into a Mirror Seal, so people wouldn't wear it. So a lot of these posts here are just reverts to nerfs. Some of them are entirely new buffs. Like I believe Devastation, like it got buffed actually compared to where it was in the previous season. And the goal here is just to bring the power level up of these like Season 1, Season 2 tier sets, if that's what you picked, to be Season 3 power. I think the balance one was partially buffed, partially nerfed, but, you know, various changes here for a lot of different classes. Notably, changes, Mistweaver got some new talents here, so potentially interesting. Dance to Chi for damage, Peer into Peace for, you know, some overhealing reduction, that kind of thing. So interesting for them, as well as Holy Priest got a ton of changes here. So a lot of stuff for healers in particular to maybe take a look at here. I'm not going to dive into it, but you know, most of these notes here are just reverts to nerfs that happened to tier sets, and some of them are buffs. Now, there's some item changes here as well. If we scroll down a little bit, one, they're changing how loot drops in the first 2 raids of the expansion to match how they drop currently, which is just good. 1 to 3 for tier to non-tier items, so you're getting a lot of non-tier items over tier items, which is good. And also, very rare items can drop in addition to the loot pool, so they'll be more plentiful, which is, again, good. They've also done some trinket adjustments here, so they've nerfed a bunch of the really powerful trinkets. You know, Whispering Incarnate Icon saw a pretty significant nerf to the ally granted stats. Ominous Chromatic Essence as well. Ferox Rage Heart saw the damage go down and the absorb go up. Chill Globe, less mana. And then, interesting, the Ward of Faceless Ire trinket actually got reduced to a 1-minute cooldown. A nerf to the absorb and the damage reduction, but still very interesting as like a defensive option that's similar to the Leaf a lot of people use in Season 3, so that could be interesting. Some trinkets got significantly reworked. We don't know exactly what this is going to look like yet because servers are still down right now, but interesting. I mean, most of these, I think probably all of these, were just unused entirely, so very, very nice to see these completely reworked, potentially giving people new trinket options in Season 4. And then we also saw a few trinkets that just got, you know, general buffs here. Caracas Searing Embers, Meg Mammoth Scale, Miniature Singing Stones. Now, the big thing I really wanted to cover is dungeon tuning. So we are data mining dungeon tuning here for all 8 of the original Dragonflight dungeons. So let's go through them. Huge one off the bat here. Now, Theris chains are not what they used to be. So they now stun enemies for 5 seconds instead of 1.5 seconds. And for that stun duration, mobs take 50% increased damage, and the chains do no damage. So now you are using those chains to get a big damage amp on these packs. You're not going to be able to just pull half the dungeon, pull it onto the chain, and insta-kill them. So you're going to be doing smaller pulls in Neltharius for sure now. But I think the big positive here is that the dungeon isn't just dying for you. You still have to play these packs, and the damage amp is not, I mean, there's still some damage benefit here. Potentially, I don't know if like a 5-second duration is maybe too little, maybe 50% damage amp is not enough, but I think in general, it's going to make the dungeon harder for sure, but it's going to be significantly more fun than just pulling a giant pull onto chains, killing it, and then going on, right? So I think this is just a good, healthy change for that dungeon for sure. Moving down here, Chargath, that is the spear guy. He's got this tank buster now while he's channeling. He's not just only going to hit the tank in the circle. He's going to be constantly doing big tank damage there. So something for tanks to actually worry about on that boss fight. They've reworked the final boss a little bit as well here. So they've made the curse debuff, which was 5 minutes, now only lasts 30 seconds. but it will stack up if you try and pick up multiple weapons. So it's, you know, now not as punishing if you're lacking a curse dispel. And that was like the big kind of defining thing. Like if you don't have a curse dispel, you're not going to be doing super well in this boss at the beginning of the expansion. And then it wasn't too bad when they made it not stack, but basically just massively reduced the duration and made it stackable again. So I think this is a good change still. Again, you're not going to be as punished by not having the curse spells. These will just kind of fall off, assuming you don't get multiple stacks, so it shouldn't be too bad. They're also making the swirlies in this boss fight 1.5 yards smaller, so down to 6-yard radius instead of 7.5. Like it's more than that, so that's pretty good. Easier to dodge all those swirlies. Moving on to Azure Vault here, we're seeing some cast time increases across the board, but here erratic growth is one of the stops or interrupts you're going to be getting early on in the dungeon. This is now a whole second longer, so you have a lot more time to get those. Draconoid Breakers here, Shoulder Slam is now going to be an 8-yard AoE once it hits its target, so you're going to want to be staying away from the actual player that is targeted by this ability, and you know, does all this other stuff too, increasing damage taken by 10% for 12 seconds and ignoring line of sight. Azure Blade is getting another nerf here, so the damage ticks are getting increased by 25% between ticks, right? So previously, every 2 seconds, you would take a tick of damage. Now it's every 2.5 seconds, and that's a pretty significant nerf. This is during the intermission phase, so you're going to be taking a decent bit less damage in that intermission phase because of that extra half second between ticks, which is nice. It's still a pretty challenging fight, is my guess. When we get to it, we'll have to see how the tuning looks, but it was a very hard fight back in Season 1. We had multiple nerfs over the course of the patch, so a little preemptive nerf to it there. Looks like they're adding some AoE damage, however, to the last boss. So now when the kind of crystallize goes out, the boss is going to be pulsing AoE damage every 1 second. So they're adding some additional party damage to Emerald Skull, the final boss of Azure Vault. Here, interesting, this actually isn't the first boss either that is receiving new abilities. We'll get to that later. Elgathar. So they're buffing the mastery buff here because it's just a flat number. So just kind of keeping it in check with Season 4 numbers versus Season 1. Trash, again, cast times are getting increased here. We're seeing Monotonous Lecture, which was a kick or stop, and then Surge, which was a kick, all getting cast increases. And then the Scepter's big Mystic Blast that you really wanted to make sure you stopped or interrupted is also getting a pretty significant damage reduction. I don't know if that really matters. I'm pretty sure this is still going to be a very scary thing to let go off ever. You probably still never wanted that to go off. Maybe it's just not an insta-death. It's now just a almost insta-death to everyone, but we'll have to wait and see. Some nerfs to Croth here as well. Again, radius reduction on some of the swirlies. And then the Savage Peck, super, super dangerous tank buster. Maybe one of the scariest tank busters in all of Mythic Plus in Dragonflight. Damage reduction on the initial hit by 13 and 33% on the bleed as well. So a big old slash coming to the Savage Peck ability. Tanks everywhere rejoicing. Here, Echo of Dorgosa, a very, very boring boss. Not much happening on that boss fight at all. They're adding an ability here, looks like. Unleash Energy. Unleashing a powerful arcane energy, inflicting some arcane damage to all players, and opening arcane rifts in nearby locations. So adding additional rifts to the boss fight. I could see this being slightly problematic, especially on higher tyrannical keys, but we'll have to wait and see how often this is cast and if these rifts, last forever or what the thing is there with them. But that boss fight was boring. It certainly needed something going on, but we'll have to see if this was the right direction for it. Moving on, we have Noku, another Season 1 dungeon here. Disruptive, Shout, just a bunch of trash abilities here. So this is now a 40-yard range. Apparently it wasn't a 40-yard range before. Interesting. Deadly Thunder, cast time reduced, actually. I don't know if you ever really pulled these mobs. I don't believe you did. I can't remember off the top of my head. I believe these were mobs near the end, like around the last boss. I don't think you ever really pulled them. Corruptors have a damage increase with their bolt, but also a cast time increase. Interesting there, a little trade-off. I guess you are now more wanting to actually kick these bolts. Beast Callers, now summon 5 dogs instead of 3. You really didn't want this cast to go off anyway, so usually it's not going to be too different. War Ahunas now increase damage by 150% instead of 200%, so a little nerf to their damage increase there. The Spears from Balara travel 417% faster. Okay, so I guess it's something to be aware of in terms of the travel time of these swirlies. Okay, and then the Beast Caller's Heavy Slash now also increases damage taken by 20%. So actually making this place in general kind of a bit more dangerous. A couple less, but a few more dangerous of the trash in Nokud. No boss changes for this dungeon. Moving down to Alderman, now we're into Season 2 here. Fiery Surge damage reduced by 50% from the Lost Vikings. I believe that's just the swirlies on the ground. That's going to be a little bit less painful there. That's it for Alderman. Also Infusion, Containment Apparatus, Containment Beam damage reduced by 41%. Those are the balls at the beginning of the dungeon. The random target beam damage, which is quite scary throughout Season 2, so it's nice to see that getting a nerf. They also adjusted the frontal on the first boss here, increasing its range to 50 yards instead of 15, so definitely wanting to ensure you are facing that boss away from your party. Brackenhide has a bunch of trash changes here, so reduction in stone or bone bolt damage. Actually, this is really good. Maybe making the left side a bit more viable now. So it's 33% reduced damage and a 6-second duration instead of 12 seconds. That's a massive damage reduction on bone bolt. Bone bolt volley also has a 5-second cast time from 2 seconds. I believe you couldn't stop stalkers, is my understanding. So I'm not sure. I mean, they'll just cast it less. You have time to defensive it or get out of range potentially, is the whole thing. But also because Bone Bolt was nerfed, I assume this also by kind of default also nerfs volley, because it says here in the text it's using a Bone Bolt, and now Bone Bolt's 33% less damage and 50% less duration. So I think that's probably just a double nerf to Bone Bolt volley. Again, you can't stop it, but it's a ton less damage going out, but it's still unavoidable damage if you're going left here and pulling these Bone Bolt volley mobs. We'll have to see if this changes anything. Elders, Decaying Roots cast time increased here, so 3.5 seconds. Again, this is the kick or stop on the right side of the dungeon. So again, just generally increasing cast times here across the board. Scented Meat now throws rotten meat instead of scented meat. I don't know what that means. You see, I mean, look it up maybe. Rotten meat? It doesn't really say. Yeah, it doesn't say what it does. So maybe something else. Maybe it means these beasts aren't going to fixate on you, potentially. That would be very, very nice, actually, not having these mobs fixate on you. So we'll see, though. Unsure. Rod Hexer's Decay Totem Withering and all the kind of withering stacking spells here, because this was a common debuff that was applied by a bunch of different things. It now no longer stacks. So previously would stack up this haste and move speed reduction and dot, and people would like open the alchemy portal or alchemy pots and like drink from the alchemy pots to remove this debuff or disease dispel it. Now it's just a single stack of 2% haste and 20 seconds. So that's actually very good. So that's a massive nerf to this ability. You could, it's not ideal obviously to sit on having this debuff on you, but it's not nearly as punishing as it was before to not have, you know, the alchemy removals or the disease removals for this ability. So that's actually really nice to see. It also means you probably don't care too much about swapping to a decay totem and losing damage to it specifically, because again, at worst, you're taking a bit of extra ticking damage and 2% haste down versus it constantly stacking up like it did before. So that's you're making the counterplay less punishing if you don't do it correctly, I guess, and potentially making it so you don't need to do it at all. Interesting to see. Stink Breath. This was the guy no one pulled, I believe, right? It's the bridge guy. He does the whirlwind attack, just a 1 yard reduction on it. You're still never going to want to pull this guy, so bigger nerfs to Stink Breath for sure if you ever want him to be pulled. Moving down here, Warband first boss. Gash Frenzy now only lasts 15 seconds, was 45 seconds, so the dot on this is only 15 seconds now. It still is going to be removed if you get them above 90% health, but now it's much less like you don't have to constantly try and pump heals into everyone if, you know, it takes longer to actually get them up. Marked for Butchery now deals damage every 1 second instead of 0.5 seconds. Again, pretty significant nerf there because it was happening basically twice as often, the damage tick. So very nice to see that kind of reduced slightly, makes it a little bit less bursty. And then Predatory Instincts now increases haste by 5%, so they're getting less haste as well. So some pretty decent nerfs here, not like massive, but I think some nice quality of life nerfs to that first boss to make it a bit less insanely punishing. And then last boss here, Withering Rod damage. That's just the the AoE that goes out, 16.7% less overall damage there. Nice. Again, makes it a little less punishing if you're missing, if you like let a cast go off from the totem, for example, I believe. But it's still going to be quite punishing. It's a relatively small nerf, I guess, compared to other things. Ruby Life Pools here, the final dungeon in the actual Season 4 pool. Some trash nerfs here to the Lightning Storm damage from the mini boss, I believe, at the end, and then the channelers at the end as well. So that was again very, very scary. moment in these keys, and again it's now ticking half as frequently, a little bit less punishing, a little bit easier to actually heal through for healers. And then a last boss nerf, much needed here, Inferno Core, damage reduced by 25%, but duration increased to 4 seconds. So it lasts a little bit longer, but all those ticks are going to be way less and punishing. And also this might not be a bad thing, because again, well, it's going to be, obviously you're taking, an extra tick here, but also you explode in flames at the end, so it gives you a bit more time to actually drop those flames off in a good spot, which is again kind of nice, but also you have to take one more tick for that, so something to keep in mind. Done any infinite stuff, not super relevant because it's not in the Mythic Plus rotation, but you are going to be able to do it on that Mythic 0 key level, which is kind of equivalent to what plus 10s are right now. So you can do things like farm an old cheat death, and it's going to be a decent eye level. So something to keep in mind there. I'm still hoping, again, this is the very first iteration. We don't even have a PTR yet for Season 4, which we will be having hopefully in the next week or so. But I'm hoping for a little bit more. Obviously, we don't know what they're going to do with affixes. We want to see what they're going to cook there. Hopefully, do something. We want to see maybe some more boss changes. I really want to see the last boss in Halls of Infusion be turned to % based instead of timer, please. I beg. But, there's a lot of other things I think in these dungeons that people would like to see still. So hopefully this is just the start of changes and not just the only changes we're going to be seeing going into Season 4. But again, that is it for this video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Let me know, are you guys excited for Season 4? Are you excited about the dungeon rotation, changes? What do you think? What would you like to see changed going into the season? Let me know down in the comments below. As always, shout out to my Patreon supporters. I could not continue making content without you. So thank you, and thanks to everyone watching. I'll see you all in the next video.